History was made by their great-grandparents' generation, a generation which heatedly debated about the direction and future of China from their times. Should China become a modern nation, and how? That debate is continuing today, even though in a very different way. What does contemporary China aspire to become? Of course, nobody should expect those serious topics to be a conversation starter when Annie and Alle meet, as they have too rich and intertwined family history to put aside. Is the history still important to us?
Families like ours are very rare. But for us, I mean, our family stories go way back to the 1910s, 1920s, when my great-great-grandfather, Liang had introduced her great-grandfather, Xu Zhimo, to our family. And that's when, they had met each other and had a number of, important experiences.
I think it's remarkable that fate sort of brought us together. And two strong women in our families,
One is her great-grandma.
Yeah. And then my own great-grandmother as well.
That's right. If you were your great-grandma or great-grandpa, on some of the most important moments of their life, what your choices would be?
I think I would have done a lot of the same things as my great-grandmother, Zhang Yuli. But in terms of my great-grandfather, I think something that we talked about earlier was the opportunities to go to a lot of different places. And I think Xu Zhimo was trying to explore and find himself in these different places, right. Whereas I know what I want and I know what I want to do. And I think that I enjoy looking at Zhang Yuli's career and the things that she did for women, and I'm so inspired by her.
Absolutely, I could tell. You even want to make a feature film about her.
As I said, one of the things that I really admired about my great-grandparents was that they were so adamant, they were so persevering in their thoughts that they were inflexible. They didn't want to change how they convey the message, and it's just because of their love and passion for the architecture. But, if things would have been different, I think if the message was conveyed in a different way, perhaps things could have been kept.
Very interesting.
If he had had the foresight that he did now, he would have done a lot of things differently. So for me, if I had gone back in time and became him, in his, efforts to preserve the city walls and the gates, I probably would have, appealed to the different, the right people, and said it in a different way, rather than saying, oh, we need to preserve the historic, but target them in a different manner. The message could have been different, so that, hey, we want to think about it for long-term economic prosperity. Maybe that would have, convinced the leadership at the time that this had, long-term benefits for the country.
In other words, you would be more flexible in the way of your communication.
I think I would.
Even though the end goal will be the same.
I think that, if there was a chance where the end goal could have been different, I would go through any means to change that outcome.
Are we that different from our previous generations?
Back then, they faced such unique circumstances with sort of the cultural flourishing, the onset of war, and then also their training in the U.S. Brought them back to China, and they were the ones who came back to build modern China. So I think that's very unique for them in that they had all the opportunities in the world to change society and to invent something new. For our generation, I think that while there's still a lot of innovation, we're also capturing some other new opportunities. And I think living in the modern world with all the scientific advancements, this brings new challenges and new roles for everyone, but especially for young women of our generation.
My parents always tell me how generous Zhang Yuli was to strangers. And if you see a poor person, a beggar on the street, she would give money to each of them right away. That was just something that was built into her herself and her daily life. And she was just so generous, and I'm always constantly reminded by her generosity. My mother met her and spent time with her towards the end of her life and Zhang Yui's life. And my mom just told me that she was just very stern, but very serious. But this kindness part just was shining.
Absolutely.
It's just very vibrant and lively, and that's why, you know, so many people were
Follow her
attracted
dreams. Yeah.
by her energy. And she really did follow her dreams in pursuing her love for architecture, for fine arts, and then also, you know, my great-grandparents traveling together to visit some of the historical sites. So you can really, you know, see her personality through the things that she's done. I mean, if you've read her, you know, diary or the letters that she's written, I mean, she has a very feisty personality. So she's, you know, she's emotional, but I feel like she's a real person.
They, at that time, did not have many options. They managed to fight their way in order to get the option. But we have so many options. Think about it. We could do anything in a way. But when they're all present to us, like the chocolate, right, in a candy shop, sometimes we get confused as to which one to choose.
I found film when I was in high school, and it just sort of came to me on my own. So in terms of options, I felt like film was the only thing that I should be doing.
Let me go to Annie.
We're very lucky that we do have a choice, but at the same time, it could hinder sort of your path in saying, okay, maybe this is my calling in life, or this is what I'm supposed to do. So as you saw my career, I mean, I started off in finance, then I went to work for a think tank, and then I went to graduate school. I was going to become a diplomat, and then when that, you know, had fallen through, I started my own businesses. Then I was doing artist management. I think the artistic side of things is really what captures me. And then I think also being an entrepreneur. I realized early on that I couldn't work for a large bureaucracy, and that I flourish so much better, or I can be much more of myself when I'm in an entrepreneurial setting and when I'm using my artistic talent. And so I think that, you know, what I'm doing now, while it sounds like, you know, I'm working for a private equity firm, an investment firm, but what I do is all of the non-investment work.
You don't choose your family, you don't choose your time period, but they could be real assets, as you can be to them. Two different generations, two critical junctures, two family stories intertwined, a legacy remembered and thriving.
You got this name tag, somebody's great-granddaughter. And therefore, wherever you go, you have this name tag and all the glories related to it. But how could you get grounded at the same time? On the one hand, having those glories with you and your family, but on the other hand, knowing exactly what you're doing and why you are having that name tag, and what you are doing with those name tags.
For me, it's about having a sense of focus, and then, you know, once I sort of understand what my goals are, having the perseverance to carry it through, right? Having long-term goals. Because as I realized over time, you know, I've gotten involved in a lot of different projects, but a lot of them are fleeting, you know, they come and go. But now what I want to do in my career is to stay somewhere for a long time and continue to build upon the foundations that I've, you know, already built, and then carry it forward. So, you know, whether it's working for the U.S.-China Green Fund in, you know, furthering our influence, you know, in influencing more institutional investors to invest in sort of sustainable sectors, or, you know, working on my charity work, which, you know, we also do a lot of charity together on, you know, Teach for China. So I'm doing a lot of environmental education. So that's extremely important for me, because I think that it's going to, you know, carry out for the future, because it's going to influence the next generation of people. And then, you know, also some of the arts projects that I'm doing. I mean, that's where my passion is. So I want to continue that and be able to influence more young people in a positive way.
I like to look at my film career in, 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year goals. But my biggest dream has always been to make a feature film about my great-grandfather, and more recently to make a feature film about my great-grandmother. And so I think in terms of name tags, I think that's how I want to use my name tag to tell those stories and be a accurate familial voice to the story.
Right. I'm always curious as to how much do you love their works? I mean, we talk about this separately, but when you are coming together, I do really wonder, what about each other's work? Do they impress you? Do you think they're still relevant today?
I actually love Alle's great-grandfather's poetry. I mean, I've read quite a few. I've quoted him many times when I send out WeChat moments. So I think his poetry is very descriptive and very vivid. And when I read it, it's just, I can imagine, the scenery, the environment, and his feelings at that time.
And what about you? Maybe for Lin Huiyan and Liang.
I think I'm very drawn to their artwork and their architecture work. I'm not as well read in terms of the poetry and the written work, but I'm learning and reading more and more recently, yeah.
And you will read one of her poems for us? Yeah. Wow. So let's make it happen. This is going to be one of those unprecedented moments. Would you like to begin?
Sure. I would like to read Do Not Forget, written by Lin Huiyan in 1936. I think she was 32 years old. Do not forget this fleeting closeness, like the comforting recognition of passing ships in the night. Now the moment flows away like water, swiftly, quietly, like the distant cold of a mountain spring, bubbling in a grove of pines at night. Vague as a sigh, remember the moment truly, as it is, as in the night sky you would remember the brilliance of the moon amid the stars. Though all is hidden behind a mountain, unchanging, invisible, hanging dreamlike, call back from the night that single phrase and stay to hear its echo from the unseen valley.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think we should applaud for her. It's beautiful, really. What about for you now, Annie?
Okay, well, I will read I Know Not in Which Way the Wind Blows, written by Xu Zhimo in 1928. I know not in which the way the wind blows. I am dreaming, whirling in the wavelets in my dreams. I know not in which way the wind blows. I am dreaming, her tenderness, my ecstasy. I know not in which way the wind blows. I am dreaming, sweet is the luster of my dream. I know not in which way the wind blows. I am dreaming, her heartlessness, my griefs. I know not in which way the wind blows. I am dreaming. My heart breaks in the sorrow of my dream. I know not in which way the wind blows. I am dreaming. Dull is the luster of my dream. I feel like this poem is very emotional for him.
Very emotional, very strong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It must be quite an experience, in a way, when he was writing this poetry. Mm-hmm. I think poetry transcends borders, and it goes into each other's hearts, dramatically and magically, just like both of you did just now. I want to thank the two of you for being with us.
You don't choose your family, you don't choose your time period, but they could be real assets, as you can be to them. Two different generations, two critical junctures, two family stories intertwined, a legacy remembered and thriving.